Well, hey guys, welcome back to Wasting Time in the Woods. Ever since I bought the GX, I've yearned to make it taller. Because, like everything in America, the taller you are, the farther you can go. Also, this kept happening. In this episode, we'll break down the reasons we chose to lift our GX in the first place, we'll touch on how suspension lifts work, and we'll take a look at the suspension setup in particular in the GX. We'll also talk about why we chose Ironman's Foam Cell Pro lift kit for Rossie. Finally, in part 2, we'll cover the install where you can watch me pretend to be a mechanic for 3 days of total freaking failure. But hey, look at her. She's so tall. She can go anywhere she wants now. Except around a corner at more than 50 miles per hour. 40 if you have anything strapped to the roof rack. But hey, she's tall, huh? She's tall. This episode is brought to you by Ironman 4x4. Ironman 4x4 is your one-stop shop for everything off-road and overland related. They've got a catalog of nearly everything worth owning in the camping and overlanding universe, and they have a huge array of hardware upgrades for nearly every four-wheel drive worth taking into the bush. From water tanks to rooftop tents, lift kits, racks, winches, and recovery gear, they've got it all, and it's all at an amazing value. And the thing that I personally love about Ironman is their Australian heritage. It's no secret that our Aussie kin have been mashing up wheeling and camping for way longer than we have, and Ironman 4x4 America is the benefactor of all that Australian heritage. Plus, this guy's pretty funny.
Happy birthday, America! It's 4th of July!
Be sure to check out Ironman 4x4 before you pull the trigger on your lift kit. You'll be glad you did. Alright guys, so why would I want to lift my vehicle in the first place? Toyota builds the world's most capable and reliable off-road vehicles, so if they thought it was tall enough, shouldn't that be good enough for me? Well, not necessarily. A vehicle design, just like any other massively complicated engineering feat, is an exercise in compromises. The engineers have designed these vehicles to perform best in its primary use case scenario. The typical consumer that the GX is marketed to looks something like this, while the more masculine looking Prado that the GX is based on is marketed to more this sort of consumer. But the distinction is really just marketing. All the Prado variants, like the GX, essentially have the same suspension aside from the optional air suspension in the rear. So why the hell did Toyota make my GX too short? Well, the truth is that 90% of GXs never leave the pavement. The ones that do spend a tiny fraction of their life in the dirt. Toyota needs these vehicles to perform well on-road first while still being capable off-road. As such, they've tuned the suspension to on-road performance and comfort. Over the years, as the Land Cruiser has transitioned from a rough and rugged form factor to a more refined family hauler, Toyota seems to have tried to strike a balance between on-road comfort and off-road capability by adding systems like KDSS. And they've done a pretty good job of striking that balance. You don't really need to lift these vehicles at all to make them capable off-road. So again, why would I even think of modifying this well-balanced piece of Toyota engineering? Because I'm a man, and we can't have babies, so we either blow shit up, or we tinker. You pick. When you lift a vehicle, you're essentially retuning it for the use case that you value more. The things that make a car handle well on the freeway, like sway bars and a low center of gravity, well, they can be pretty detrimental on the trail, where ground clearance and articulation are the currency of the day. We spend a lot of time on the trail, so retuning the suspension towards off-road capability, well, it made a lot of sense to us. It's still a daily driver though, and we wanted to lift it just enough to get the additional clearance that we needed while still being able to park it in the garage with the rack on. I used to think that you needed a lift for bigger tires. That was before I installed my lift and found out that I actually rubbed more after the lift. That's right, let that sink in a minute. Maybe send your wife out of the room if you've been selling the whole lift kit based on the tire rubbing situation. My 2.5-inch lift kit actually caused my 32-inch tires to rub more. Now we know that tire clearance issues are probably better handled by pushing out a little more plastic, which is a whole lot cheaper than a $3,000 lift kit. The real advantage of a lift kit is to increase ground clearance and travel. By increasing ground clearance, you can go over more obstacles instead of going around them, and by increasing travel, you get to do it faster and more comfortably. Now, before you run off and tell your wife, Jake told you to use the tax return on a fancy new lift kit, let's consider the drawbacks. When you lift a truck, you reduce its stability, both by raising the center of gravity and increasing the geometry angles of its steering components. You not only decrease its driving stability, you also make it less reliable, as CV joints and ball joints and every other mofo up in this joint is forced to operate in an angle more extreme than they were designed for. Lifting a vehicle can also have a negative impact on gas mileage by increasing turbulence under the car, but on the other hand, you can make it taller. The good news is that at least some of those issues can be mitigated with diff drop kits and adjustable upper control arms, and if you stay around 2 inches or so of lift, you can get away without most of that stuff. All right, now that we've decided to meddle with it, modify it, we should probably have an idea of how the existing suspension works. The rear of the GX has a live axle and 5-link suspension. Live axles have a direct 1-to-1 lift ratio. If you stick a 1-inch spacer or 1-inch longer coil spring between your chassis and axle, you'll get 1 inch more lift. Not hard. Our GX has air springs instead of coil springs in the back, but the principle is exactly the same. It's really dead simple. In the front, you've got IFS or double wishbone suspension. They call it that because you'll double wish you didn't have it when you blow a CV joint on the trail. Our GX has 2 wishbony looking triangles for control arms and a strut. Strut is what happens when a daddy shock and a mommy spring love each other very much. Lift happens as a ratio with IFS because the spring is tucked back along the axis of articulation. On our GX, the ratio of spring increase to lift height is about 2 to 1. 1 inch of additional spring height or preload will result in 2 inches of additional lift. To lift an IFS vehicle, you've got essentially 3 options. A longer spring, B, stiffer springs or more preload, or C, a spacer. Now B and C will get you there, but only a longer spring paired with a longer shock will maximize travel, comfort, and capability. Okay, so that's what the suspension in the GX looks like. Let's talk about which lift we went with and why. The most impactful part of the lift is the spring, because that's what makes it taller. But there's not much differentiation in them. You don't hear a lot of manufacturers bragging about spring technology because, well, there isn't any. All the innovation that you can put into a loosely coiled piece of steel probably happened like 200 years ago. The shock is where the money's at. While the spring dampens the up and down movement, the shock is tasked with absorbing all of that energy and converting it to heat. The shock wears out the quickest, fails the most often, and has the highest impact on performance on and off the trail. If you want to be able to floor it down washboard roads that would normally make your kids say, "Daddy, stop, the dog's under the ice chest again," you're gonna need a lot of shock. So what makes the Ironman Foam Cell Pro shock special? Well, the biggest problem with shocks is cavitation. That's when a shock gets really hot from overuse, causing little bubbles of gas to form in the oil, which causes the shock to go from smooth to sloppy. Manufacturers use all sorts of tech to avoid cavitation. They add remote reservoirs, make the shocks huge, they pressurize them, they make them giant freaking Mad Max double shocks. All of it aimed at keeping the shock oil from getting hot, foaming up, and mixing with the nitrogen that they use to pressurize them. Now, the Foam Cell Pros, they do something a bit novel. They do away with the nitrogen gas altogether and replace it with closed cell foam. With no nitrogen gas, there's nothing to mix, so if cavitation does occur, its effects are minimized. And they just seem like the best mix of on-road performance, price, and reliability. They have a 3-year, 60K warranty, and they're totally rebuildable. Are they as fancy as some of the other options on the market? No, but they also don't require regular rebuilds. With shocks from some of the big-name remote reservoir companies, you actually have to rebuild them about once a year. That's right, your $3,500 lift kit that you just bought gets you 4 shocks that have to come out of your vehicle and get rebuilt every 15,000 miles. I hope you know how to do that yourself, because if you don't, you might as well just buy 2 sets of shocks right now. Have fun explaining that one to your wife. Now, I'm not an expert in off-road performance, and I am certain that there are better performing shocks than the Foam Cell Pros. There are also probably a lot of cheaper shocks and way fancier ones. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a shock that matches the performance, reliability, and adjustability of the FCPs, and you certainly aren't gonna find it at this price point. So that's why I went with them. I wanted performance without maintenance, and that's what the Foam Cell Pros deliver. We chose Ironman Stage 1 FCP kit with an adjustable rear panhard bar. The front FCP shocks are freaking huge. They have a 2.8-inch diameter body and are continuously adjustable at the spring perch. We went with the 2.5-inch stock load springs in the front. I also had them pre-assemble the struts to make the install a bit easier. In the rear, I went with the smallest spring they offer in their kits, which was the 2-inch medium duty. Now I thought that combined with a 2.5-inch front spring would level me out a bit. I was wrong, but we'll get into that in part 2. For the back, I also picked up KDSS spacers along with their airbag delete kit. Now the thing that I really love about this setup is that all 4 corners are continuously adjustable at the spring perch. If I get a little lean here or there in the future due to uneven sag, I can just adjust it back into level. The only thing that I regret was not getting the adjustable upper control arms. They told me that I probably wouldn't need them, but after driving the truck lifted for a couple months, I think I need them. All right guys, in part 2 of this video, we'll cover the install. We'll talk about a couple huge screw-ups that I made that cost me a ton of time. And we'll talk about the wrong part, which Ironman sent me and is still shipping in their kits, including how you can modify it to make it work, so you don't have to spend your entire Saturday running around to 6 different Ace Hardwares like I did. All right guys, if you like this sort of content, please hit like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you out there.